Thank you, Jake Roberts, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yes, yes.
I've been looking forward to this.
So have I. So have I. So you are a Bacon decryptor or a Bacon decipherer.
Yeah, I guess that's as good of a name for it as anything. I haven't really, been able to find, a lot of information, particularly in decrypting the ciphers of Francis Bacon the way I do it. There have been a lot of people who have tried to do this, particularly back in the uh, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and they've all been soundly debunked, unfortunately. And so, when I kind of stepped into the fray, I knew the history of it, and I also knew that when people hear that, oh, you're decrypting ciphers of Sir Francis Bacon, oh, and it involves Shakespeare, they tend to kind of roll their eyes. It's not a popular thing to do. But what I did was I made sure that I was using very sound scientific decryption techniques, that are valid and were known to the cipher systems that Francis Bacon was known to have used himself, and along with many other people in his circle. And so all I did was start applying it, and that's when the messages started appearing.
Okay. Can you explain a little bit what a cipher is?
Yeah, sure. A cipher is different than a code. We tend to use these words interchangeably, right? Um, a code involves, usually a substitution of some kind, where this symbol represents this letter and so on. Ciphers, are good because they work in what's called steganography. The cipher systems of Sir Francis Bacon uh, are basically binumerative, meaning that you each letter of the alphabet is assigned a number. Okay, and so it's the Elizabethan alphabet. So we're only dealing with 24 letters here, right? Because the Elizabethan alphabet did not have the letter J or the letter U. Instead, they used I and V, respectively. And so if you were to assign 1 to A, all the way through up to Z as 24, that's simple cipher, right? And then he used the opposite, what called reverse cipher. It's not just a clever name, it just describes what it is. You have the letter A assigned the value of 24, and Z is 1, and all the rest in between. So that's really all it does. There's another one called K cipher, which starts at the letter K, with a value of 10, and it goes all the way to 24 to Z, but then it starts over again at letter A as a value of 27, all the way to I having 35. And so these variables are what create the different values of, say, the name Francis Bacon, right? And so certain specific values represent these names, and they also represent ideas like frater, the Latin term for brother. So these ciphers, that's really all they are, is this substitution of numbers for letters. And it's working on the Pythagorean principle that all the world can be explained using number, right? And so when you see, for example, seeing the image of a rabbit drawn in some of these Rosicrucian documents, if you look at the rabbit and you spell out the word rabbit, and then you calculate all the values in the cipher systems of the word rabbit, this is called a pictorial cipher, where that rabbit suddenly represents these names and words that would appear. That's just one example of how they work. And I mentioned the word steganography. Steganography is just a fancy word that means secret writing. So it can be a steganographic message just appears to be a normal letter, for example, or in the case of what I did in my first book, the plaque, there's a verse on the plaque of the funerary monument of Shakespeare. Okay, it just looks like a regular verse. And when you read it, you're like, it sounds a little weird, but I guess it kind of makes sense. But in reality, underneath the surface is a whole series of cipher messages. That's what steganography does. It provides the casual viewer with something that just looks normal on its surface, but embedded within it are secret messages.
Okay.
And so that's really how his cipher systems work. He created a specific one when he was only 16 years old, and this is the most famous one. It's called the biliteral cipher, and if you just do a search for Bacon's cipher, that will come up on the internet. And this is a really interesting one because you can use anything, any series of objects to represent a message. And so the way it works, it has an A alphabet and a B alphabet. And if you have so think of if you have 5 letters in you have to group the all of the characters and letters in groups of 5. Okay. Within those 5 letters, if you have all from the A alphabet, for example, suppose you're using letters that are just regular letters, but then you're also using some letters that are italicized. Well, the regular letters, they're the A alphabet. The italics are B alphabet.
Okay.
And so when you have 5 that are all A, that's the letter A. If you have 4 from A and then 1 from B, an italicized one, that's the letter B. And so by organizing, these letters in such a way where you have a mixture of your A and B alphabet, you can change them to represent all, a group of 5 letters will represent one letter of the alphabet, and you can spell out a message that way. Really pretty fascinating system. It's actually the forerunner of computer language today,
Okay.
of ones and zeros. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And you briefly mentioned, I'll use the word funeral because I can't say that other word, but the funeral monument at is it Trinity Church?
Holy Trinity Church in Stratford upon Avon. Yes.
Okay.
And this is, the very famous monument where you see the bust of Shakespeare, like looking all weird, trying to write on a pillow.
Mhm.
And so within that, underneath that is a plaque that has a verse. It has a Latin inscription on top, and then underneath that is a "Stay passenger," you know, in the whole sequence of the rest of the verse. Uh, what I did was I discovered, just looking at it, I could tell there was what was called a transposition cipher in it. And all that means is you have to take the characters as they appear on the plaque, and then you rearrange them into a table, a transposition table. And then transposition ciphers actually produce what are called acrostic anagrams. An acrostic anagram is just, and everyone knows what an anagram is, where you have to rearrange the letters to form a word. Well, when these letters will appear in a very specific shape, in the case of Bacon's ciphers, they usually show up in the form of a T, the letter T. Then you can, all these letters that are touching each other as an acrostic, that's what it means, in the form of a T, you can spell out a word. And those words in the letter T provide the context for the rest of the words that you can find in the message. Really pretty cool, very fascinating. And it was just ingeniously done. And there were no less than 5 different transpositions in that one plaque.
Wow. Okay.
So, and again, just using, those standard decryption methods, I was able to read his hidden autobiography. It's the subtitle of my first book, The Hidden Autobiography of Sir Francis Bacon, where he details that and this is the part that other Baconians kind of don't like about my work, is I was able to discover that his true parents, his biological parents, were none other than Mary Queen of Scots and Francis II of France. Now, the problem, of course, is that all of these messages that appear sound crazy. They run completely counter to what we think we know from Orthodox history. And so when I make these, people call them claims. When I'm delivering the message that Bacon recorded. These discoveries, they sound crazy, and I know all of the historical reasons, from Orthodox history of why these things aren't supposed to be true, but they're nonetheless true, because they really took the time to encode a secret. That's the whole purpose of these ciphers, to encode secrets and record them. And they're not going to record something that's false.
Right.
So, you look at that and suddenly, I'm in that kind of unenviable position where I'm telling, fellow Baconians, I'm a member of the Francis Bacon Society. that, oh, sorry, gang, we all got it wrong. He wasn't the secret son of Queen Elizabeth at all, which is the preferred theory of Baconians.
Mhm.
He does state that he wrote the works of Shakespeare, but he didn't do it alone. And so, just that alone, I thought would really make them very happy with my discoveries. But the fact that I'm saying that no, he wasn't Elizabeth's son at all, that's the part that kind of sticks in people's throats, I guess.
Right. So Orthodox history has him as the son of Nicholas and Anne Bacon.
Correct.
And then
Yep.
traditional Baconian theory is that he was the
Secret
secret
son.
son of Elizabeth I.
Correct.
And then through your research, you are now saying it is Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yes.
It's his mother, along with Francis II.
Francis II of France. Yes. And again, when people look at this on its face, they say, well, it's been proven that Francis II, couldn't have children, and that's not true at all. It hasn't been proven. One of Catherine de' Medici's ladies in waiting, Catherine de' Medici, of course, being reputably one of the most evil people in any of these stories, according to most historians. One of her ladies in waiting recorded that in her journal, and kind of casting aspersion. And I think, if I remember correctly, it wasn't written until after he had died. And so what this does is it kind of disputes the idea that, frankly, this baby, Francis Valois Angoulême III, he was the Dauphin of France, and he was a state secret. What happened was this challenged Catherine Medici's power. She was the queen regent. Now, Francis II was coming of age, but suddenly he fell sick with, an inner ear infection, I guess it was. And meanwhile, Mary had already announced to the court, at least on one other occasion, that she was pregnant, and then she miscarried. And at this point, according to ciphertext, she gave birth to Francis Bacon, the man we know as Francis Bacon, just about a month after her husband died. Now, Catherine de' Medici obviously was not going to wait for Mary, Queen of Scots, to take over France because she never liked her. They never really got along. Catherine never wanted Mary for her son Francis. This was a decision made by her husband. And so at that point, here was Mary, and one of the messages that I decrypted stated that that Mary overheard that Francis the baby was sick from poison. And he references his evil grandmother. And I think it's Avia, Malavia, Latin for evil grandmother. So at that point, you have Mary fleeing and back to Scotland. And the interesting part is there would have to be a whole series of negotiations to allow her to come back to the islands, which there were. And Amyas Paulet was one of the people involved in those negotiations with Queen Elizabeth, allowing Mary to come back to the islands. Now, here's the thing. We know that Elizabeth didn't have any heirs that she could admit to publicly. And here was Mary, Queen of Scots, coming back to England, a challenger for the throne of England, and she had an heir. Well, what would the negotiations be to allow her to come back? This is the point where Mary had to turn over her son to Queen Elizabeth's keeper of the seal and her number one friend, Lady Anne Bacon.
Okay.
This is a threat to her throne, so she wants to keep her enemies close. And so what did she do? Her most ardent supporters raised the son of her biggest challenger. And they raised him to make sure that he loved his Queen Elizabeth and to be very, very wary of Mary, Queen of Scots. And that's exactly what happened.
Okay. And I think traditional history says Francis II died of an inner ear infection.
Correct.
But through your research, there's a possibility he was murdered through.
It's very possible that his own mother poisoned him. so that Mary couldn't, and Francis couldn't come of age and take over, and Mary would edge out Catherine
Okay.
Medici. Yeah.
And this would resonate with Hamlet.
So yeah. And I kind of go into that in detail in my next book. In my Shakespeare chapter, I talk about, I go through all of the cipher evidence in the sonnets in particular, but then I also, I kind of give an overview of some of the similarities between the secret history and many of the plays. And one of the best examples I can think of is the play within the play in Hamlet. It's called The Murder of Gonzago. And in this, this is where Hamlet portrays his father being murdered as he slept in the garden. And it shows the murder of Gonzago shows the king falling asleep in the garden and his evil brother coming out and pouring poison into his ear as a way of murdering him. And so this, of course, causes the Hamlet's uncle, dad, the king, to obviously freak out at that moment and scream for lights. And so, and that's where Hamlet says, I caught the conscience of the king. Here we go. I know he did it. But the murder of Gonzago also really mirrors the death of Francis II. And so if we think of Hamlet as a small piece of ham or bacon, and if you actually look at the original frontispiece of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, and note the spelling of Denmark with an E. When you calculate the cipher values, it turns out to be the value of Francois, his name in French, which is what it would be had his father lived. Okay. So, these little Easter eggs, like I said, we were talking before we started the show. I think that's one of the biggest errors that, some of those predecessors who delved into the Baconian ciphers in the works of Shakespeare, I think this is where they really kind of missed their mark, because what I've found in my experience, and I could turn out to be completely wrong about this, because I know that, as you know, we've talked about this before, I make all of my work open source because I want other people to jump on this bandwagon and see what else they can find. So I teach people how to do this. I may be proven wrong about this, but from my experience, the plays of Shakespeare in the first folio, as they appear in that original document, they contain these little ciphers as what I call Easter eggs, right? Where on a very specific page, a page number that has, a significant value in Bacon's cipher systems, there's a message that appears there, and maybe it doesn't continue on any other pages. It could be just that one page, and I see this on the frontispieces of a lot of their works, and of the Rosy Cross. And so, yeah, that's kind of how, I've been approaching all of this material. I see what's there, and then I just follow the clues where they lead me. And so far, I started with the plaque, and I call that the Rosetta Stone of the Rosy Cross, because all of the secrets are in there. And from there, it leads to a whole variety of places, including maps of contemporaries, sea navigational charts, paintings. It's really kind of neat. It's very similar to the movie National Treasure, where one clue leads from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and then finally you've come full circle, and you realize you go back to the original message, and there are even more messages there you missed that you learned how to decrypt by going around in this little Easter egg hunt, I guess you'd call it.
Okay.
So,